and today we're going to talk about air strategies for the ocean chaos. This is the right moment to talk about this. In normal times, air freight is around 20 times more expensive than ocean freight. But currently it's only 8 times as expensive as ocean freight. And although I wouldn't call that an opportunity, it might give you some considerations to change something in your supply chain and leverage air freight strategically. For all of you who've joined us before, the webinar platform looks a little different this time. We've changed to a new webinar platform, which hopefully will serve us better. But if you have any questions, you can always use the Q&A or the chat function on the right side. There's a bar on the right side. There's a chat function where we can help you during the webinar if you have any issues. There's also a Q&A tab. Please ask your questions through the Q&A tab. Our moderator will surface those questions throughout the webinar, but we also have time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. I would like to draw your attention to the next webinar. The next Logistics Rewired webinar is in a month from now, on August 25th, so just under a month from now. And as always, directly after this webinar, the on-demand version will be available, and will be available through the same link if you want to review it. Next slide, please. As always, from our legal team, please keep in mind that we're going to give you a lot of information in this webinar, but it might not be specific or customized to your specific situation. So please talk to your team if you want to know how to make this more specific to your situation. All right, next slide. Let me introduce who we are today. For those who have been here multiple times, you know me because I'm very often hosting these webinars. My name is Sonne Manders. I'm the COO of Flexport. With me today, one face that is very familiar, Neil Jones-Shah. He's been with Flexport for a very long time. He's our global head of air freight. And of course, very delighted to have him here talking about air freight. A new face to the table is Paul Rombeek. And Paul has joined us recently. He's been a veteran in the air freight industry, or in the air industry, I should say, not in the air freight industry, in the air industry. Spent his whole career there, and most recently as the chief commercial of Jetstar in Southeast Asia. Welcome, guys. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next slide. Cool. Before, and this is what you know from us, before we start, I'd like to have a quick poll here. And can we beam up the poll here? And the poll is, given the current market conditions, are you considering new modes of transportation? In other words, how relevant is this webinar for you? Are you considering to use air freight? Very simple, 2 answers, yes or no. Votes rolling in. Give it a few more seconds. All right. Can we see the results? Can we see the results? Something hanging in the background here.
I see in the chat room, Sonne, that 95% says yes.
All right, 95% says yes. Great. That's great. So, all right, we have some issues with our webinar platform to show the results, but 95% yes. That's so you're in the right webinar here today. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, for today, we have a couple of topics. First of all, global market constraints. I will talk a little bit about the ocean market to sketch the context on what is going wrong here. Then we're talking about the air freight market, and then we're going into creative solutions, how you can leverage air freight to unblock your current supply chains. And then, of course, we have some key takeaways and a Q&A. Next slide, please. Okay. Ocean market, next slide. Let's start here, right? I think what's really important to know is there is no global demand boom. This is a North America demand boom, which is the North American consumer is spending much more than they used to. And it doesn't make sense to compare it to 2020 because 2020 was a weird year. But if you're comparing 2021 versus 2019, the North American consumer spends much more, and that leads to 10% more import growth. If you compare that to other regions in the world, here as a comparison, the European Union, there it's only 1.4%, which is kind of like normal annual growth. So what you see here is a breakout consumer spending from the North America consumer, but this has a global impact. Next slide, please. What does this actually do to the world of ocean freight? When you look at the world of ocean freight, there are three lines here on this slide. The green line is the demand for space. So this is the demand that customers have to, for container space. That is up, year over year from, let's say, if you compare January 2019, when the index started at 100, it is close to 140 right now. So you see that trend going up from last, let's say, July, and it has remained high since July. Well, what a lot of people say is like, okay, but can we then just deploy more vessels? Because then when there's demand, you should deploy more supply, and things will balance again. Well, that's actually what you see happening here, right? There is a lot more planned space, which means that the ocean carriers have planned a lot more space. But when you're looking at the red line, you actually see that the actual space, so the realized space, didn't go up. And why is that? This is because a lot of the vessels are tied up in queues. There's literally a traffic jam, right? And this traffic jam is across the whole industry. It's a traffic jam in there's a shortage of containers, there's a shortage of chassis, there's a shortage of rail equipment, there's a shortage of vessels. But why is it? Because it's all sitting in traffic jams. Why is that? Customers are not returning their containers quick enough. We used to have labor shortages in the port. There's problems everywhere. But what you see effectively here is, although extra capacity is deployed, the effective capacity didn't go up. So there's a big gap between demand and supply, which leads to the situation that we're in, and the low reliability and high prices that we're seeing right now. All right, next slide. What you also see is that the volatility has gone up quite a bit. So what you see here on the right side is a graph of the Far East westbound capacity over 2 years, 2019 and 2021. And what you see here, that in 2019, it was actually relatively stable. But if you're going to 2021, there's a lot of volatility. And why is that? That is because of Suez, it's because of the Yantian port closure, it is because a lot of blank sailings to restore schedules. And what you see, though, is that not only is the capacity under pressure, although it's a little higher, what you see here, it is extremely volatile. And that volatility brings a lot of problems for importers. Go next slide, please. So what has this resulted into? It's resulted into very, very long transit times and very poor reliability. This is an example of Shanghai, Los Angeles, Chicago transit. This used to be roughly 35 days, right? Between cargo ready date and the departure, 10 days, then 13 days on the water, some discharge, rail, and delivery to the warehouse, 35 days. When you're looking at it today, it's 73 days. This 35 days means that's the journey for a container is 35 days, plus typically 35 days back, right? The container now takes 73 days and 73 days back. What it effectively means that, that journey of 70 days became 140 days. So it effectively reduces the number of available containers by 50%, on this specific example. And that's for everything that you see here, right? The vessels used to take 13 days, well, probably also 13 days back. Now it's 30 days, and then probably 13 days back. But still, the effective capacity as a result is much lower. And how you should see this, because the biggest bottleneck, right, is now ocean capacity. The reduction in capacity is roughly 20% right now on the theoretical maximum. So 20% is actually, although deployed, is not really effective. And that is equivalent to taking every large vessel bigger than 18,000 TEU out of rotation. So think about that, just parking all the mega vessels in the world. That's effectively what happens to capacity right now. All right, next slide, please. Of course, you all know this has led to high rates, and I'll talk about that in a second, and very low reliability. The port-to-port reliability has gone down to the low 30s, where this used to be high 70s, now it's low 30s. Door-to-door, when you consider trucking, rail, container availability, has basically gone down to zero. Next slide, please. What's important to understand here for the rates is that the rate indices, like the Shanghai Containerized Rate Index, are not reflective of the reality, right? So if you're looking at the first line here, the current floating averages, those are the rates that are published. But if you add on all the equipments, which the surcharges for equipment, space priority, or in other words, to get loaded, etc., you actually get to a moving rate which is much higher, right? And Asia to the U.S. West Coast between $13,000 and $19,000, depending on the week, depending on the port pairs. The East Coast is even worse, and I've actually seen rates that go up to $24,000 on the East Coast for further premium services. Just to say here, right, the rates are out of control, right? Where you looked at the West Coast on a rate that used to be like $1,500, $2,000, we're now talking about a 10x of that. And that's what happened to the ocean market. And hence we're having a conversation about what's happening to the air market, and does it actually make sense to leverage air for your ocean freight? Next slide. Neil, I think this is a good segue to you to talk about the air market.
Great, thanks, Sanne, and it's a pleasure to be with you and with all of our guests this morning. Well, you painted a very dramatic picture of what's going on in the ocean, and it is some of the toughest market conditions we've seen, in our history. And what we also know is that what is going on with one mode does impact other modes. There is a follow-on impact. So I would like to start out by just talking about where is air freight capacity today, because we know this pandemic had a dramatic impact on air freight capacity over the when this pandemic started, because of the loss of passenger traffic. And so if we look at the latest statistics, global air freight capacity is still down 12% over where it was at the same time in 2019. We're not going to make any comparisons back to 2020 because it was such an odd year. But if we go back to the last sort of historically normal year, capacity is still down 12%. And if you look at this global sort of chart, you can see that the volume has recovered in many key trade lanes, but it's still down significantly in many others. And this is because freighters have been deployed in the trade lanes where demand has called for it, particularly in the Trans-Pacific eastbound. You actually see capacity in the mid-single digits ahead of 2019. You also see it North and South America, where freighters have been deployed to take care of demand in that market. But in many other parts of the world, including the Far East westbound, transatlantic, you see capacity still down significantly. And this is because these are regions that were heavily dependent on passenger belly capacity to carry air freight. And because that is still lagging significantly behind 2019, we have this deficit position. So if we move on to the next slide, I think it's very important to talk about not only this overall picture of air freight, but just to talk about how this market recovery is playing out, because it's going to be extremely uneven. And we see this disruption on a global basis, continuing through 2024, depending on which trade lane you're shipping in. And I think the first thing I wanted to highlight here is that I think everybody on this call continues to see headlines on the news and on your phones that, TSA checkpoint volumes are at all-time highs, surpassed 2019 numbers. And what I wanted to comment there is that these numbers are quite deceiving. Because the demand patterns for passenger travel have changed dramatically since the pandemic. All this demand is for, in the US, for example, is for domestic travel. In Europe, it's for intra-European travel. Think, UK to Spain sort of trade lane. In the US, people are going from where they live to national parks. They're going to Hawaii. They're going to Mexico. But this doesn't do anything to help our capacity situation for international air freight, which requires wide bodies flying internationally. Unfortunately, that demand is still down 80%. And we don't anticipate this improving. In fact, we're taking a step in the other direction as countries continue to lock down as this Delta variant takes hold. So international demand is going to continue to be down and is going to recover very unevenly. We expect transatlantic could be back to normal by summer of 22, but Asia, which has more of a zero COVID sort of strategy, could lag until 2024. And one key point to make here is that this boom in domestic traffic is actually impacting cargo capacity in a negative way, because a lot of these passenger freighters that we've talked about in prior webinars that have been flying in the Pacific, for example, have been pulled back by the carriers to fly domestic passenger missions. So as a specific example, United Airlines was flying about 1,500 passenger freighters a month in June. They're down to 0 in July, and it's because all of those aircraft were redeployed to fly from Chicago to Honolulu or from Denver to New York. And that's a trend that we see from all of the carriers, where this capacity is being redeployed for passenger business. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for rates? Sana put a chart up a few slides earlier, which showed ocean freight rates on an adjusted basis up over 10x what they were historically. Well, air freight hasn't increased by nearly that amount. Rates are obviously up. 2019 versus 2021, but they are up, in a much more moderate fashion when you look at sort of the increase versus historical norms. On average, they're up about 2x versus 10x, and on the Trans-Pacific trade lanes. And if you think about the gap between air and ocean, this is actually what's making air more affordable today than it was 2 years ago, and I think is creating opportunities for some of this ocean freight to convert to air. Maybe I'll hand it off to you, Paul, and you can talk a little bit about the Far East westbound.
Yeah, thanks, Neil, and thanks everyone. Great to be here. Yeah, no, I think for the Far East westbound, as we saw, there's also an increase in the prices. I think the point I wanted to make is to the earlier point that the capacity recovery is very uneven. So it's 12% down currently versus 2019, but as the map shows, and as Neil explained, that differs in pockets in the world. And therefore prices and dynamics are also very regionally affected, even on market by market level. On the Far East westbound, we see, for example, from Hong Kong and Guangzhou to Europe, prices are obviously up, as we have seen, but in the last months are stabilizing. From PVG and mainland, it's actually the last months or weeks, it's decreasing prices. But from Taipei, there is a surge. There's a massive surge from Taipei into Europe. and that's because of local dynamics. Very strict COVID regulation in Taiwan causes airlines to cancel flights, which has an effect on prices. So just to the point that yes, there is a recovery on capacity, and there are estimates from IATA that will be in 2022, but it's very, very regional. On the next slide, maybe, we then talk about, so what can we expect? And obviously, it's not a surprise to anyone here in this room that we can expect a very competitive market. On the next slide, if we go back to ocean, as Sanne did earlier on in the webinar, this drives incredible demand for air freight. And we see that demand continues to outpace capacity on the ocean side, which has a massive effect on prices. Even excluding all the shocks that we have seen, prices have surged, as we have heard. So what will that do for air? A few things. We think that the current prices do not reflect the future. Demand for air will continue to go up, and we will talk about that later. There is this perfect storm that Neil and I will talk about, and therefore we think air will become more and more part of your modal mix. And if it's not, it has to become.
Yeah, if we go to the next slide, really quickly, I just want to sort of set up the next section of our webinar here. We sort of, on the air freight side and the ocean freight side, you obviously have, low seasons and peak seasons. It seems that for the past, almost 18 months, we've sort of been in this never-ending peak. We think we're going to get a little bit of a lull, and then we take another leg higher. And this is true with air freight for sure. And we continue to set new records in terms of volume and demand. And we believe that this is going to continue, not only for the balance of this year, but also well into 2022. And so, while so preparing for peak is very important. I think we've probably been in peak now for 18 months, but I think, you're going to see intense demand, starting here in August. And it's really driven by three primary factors. And Paul, why don't you get us started and talk about the first couple?
Yeah. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, so this is what I talked about earlier, the perfect storm. And I want to take one step back before we talk about the items here on the slide. Now, on the slide. But so overall, demand for air freight is expected to keep increasing with about 2.7% for the next 5 years. And this is while capacity will still be very much in recovery mode. So that's one thing. The other thing is that trade is becoming increasingly complex due to e-commerce. And that complexity will drive further growth for air, we think. And because complexity of supply chain, you have to think about more origins, more destinations, faster transit times, door-to-door deliveries. It's all faster and more agile, which drives more demand for air. And this retail boom, online retail boom, is only beginning. Today, 20 to 30% of total retail sales is online, and that is going to further increase. Now, that's compounded by seasonal shocks, back to school, Black Friday and holidays. If we add in the mix the capacity, then yeah, we believe there is this perfect storm on the air side that will dramatically change the dynamics. Neil will talk now about the other impact of this perfect storm, and that is the impact on the inventory to sales ratio.
Hey, Nathan, can you move the slides, please? Yeah, one more, please. Okay, so Paul talked about two of the three factors. The third and very dramatic sort of last factor that's clearly driving demand is this historically low inventory to sales ratio. I think this is a very dramatic chart here. If you go back, multiple years, we've gone back to 2013 here, you can see how the inventory to sales ratio has been very sort of stable around that 1.4 to maybe 1.5, mark over the past several years. Obviously spiked up as COVID hit. And then, you see this dramatic sort of leg down, over the first few months of COVID. And then that has just continued now to where we're barely above 1.2 to 1.3. So, we are now in a, actually, maybe 1.1 actually. And so we're in a historic low when it comes to inventory to sales ratio. A lot of shippers have been waiting to replenish their inventory, waiting for a drop in costs, so they don't incur these massive supply chain, expenses. And this drop never came. And so now, we have consumers that have saved over $3 trillion here in the US alone. They're ready to spend their money, but, sometimes they're finding empty shelves. And this situation now over the coming months with back to school and lots of big events coming up, could drive this ratio even lower, is our expectation. So this is, at some point, you have to get inventory in regardless of the mode, and sometimes even regardless of the cost. And so we're going to transition now into what are some of the ways we should be thinking about, different modes. So if we could go to the next slide. So turning chaos into opportunity. So let's move on. All right, Sana, I think we actually have another poll here. You want to introduce this poll?
Sure. Let me see here. For those who primarily ship ocean, FCL or LCL, and are expanding their modal mix, are you considering any of the following? Premium ocean services, air freight, or I'm not expanding my modal mix? All right. Wait a little bit more. I see 107 votes in. But I know there are many more people online. All right, let's go. It looks like everyone is changing their mode mix. So premium ocean 50%, air freight 41%. And only 8% not changing their mode mix. I think just, this is not a reflection of people wanting to do this, but needing to do this because there's just no other options right now. If you want to make sure that you have inventory in stock with when the holiday season is there, premium ocean and air freight are currently the more reliable options here. All right, back to you, Neil.
Great, thanks. And thank you everybody for those responses. It ties back perfectly to the 95% of you who said you're considering different modes to handle your supply chain challenges for the balance of the year. So when you look at modes, I mean, obviously, you have two choices, right? Or really sort of a hybrid of maybe 2.5 choices when you look at the different modes. You have the traditional sort of FCL, ocean, which obviously has the longest lead times, and Sana talked about what the lead times look like today versus what they look like historically. And then you have several varieties of sort of ocean freight, including premium ocean services. You obviously have some expedited ocean and transshipment opportunities, with traditional ocean services, and then you get to air freight, which has always been the most expensive on a per kilo basis, but also provides you the fastest transit, and today actually continues to provide the most reliable transit time in terms of what is committed. So the real question is today is to how do you think about how a new modal mix may impact your supply chain and may allow you to hit your target dates, whether it's for customer commitments that you've made, whether it's for a certain specific product launch. how do you utilize new modes of transportation in order to hit your commitments and keep your supply chain moving. So if we could go to the next slide. Technology plays an absolutely critical role here, and I'm going to hand it off to Paul to talk us through this what looks like a rather complicated chart. Good luck, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And exactly, this is obviously something that we are passionate about. We are talking about cost. Some of your considerations for supply chain choices are around cost, transit time, reliability. We believe that some of these benefits can be combined through technology, and what our technology can do, if you talk about creative solutions, is, for example, optimize your supply chain and therefore reduce your cost by route optimization. And how this works is that in our platform, we inject all the different inventory options that are available. And then I'm talking about all modes. And we talk about the trucking part, the air part, all parts of a total air journey, or where air is part of the journey. And then the algorithms in our platform will allow us to optimize or to find the best routing given certain variables. And this way, we can actually help our customers to optimize some of their supply chain and actually reduce costs in the total move of this freight. Another example is where we use our technology is data. So with having everything in one platform, having everything available in one spot, allows us to analyze the data of your supply chain in a very detailed and thorough way. We have examples where we help customers look at their different SKUs and on all the difficulties they currently have, and optimize what mix works now best for them. Because for some parts of your restocking efforts, you need a faster solution than for other parts of your restocking efforts. And this is exactly to the point Neil earlier made. Air may seem the most expensive solution, but if we actually dive much deeper into the data, into the details on SKU level, we can help you to come up with solutions through technology that actually allow mix of modes that optimize your supply chain cost, but at the same time also satisfy the needs in terms of transit times.
Yeah, Paul, that's fantastic, and again, that's what structuring the data allows you to accomplish. So if we move to the next slide, so after you've done that hard work, right, and you've determined at a SKU level what needs to move faster and what can actually afford to move, with the new transit times, that you're getting on the ocean. Well, then how do you take advantage of that, right? With all of this new information, what do you do with it? And I think here at Flexport, we've been working hard over the past couple of years to really build this global pallet network. Okay, it's our consolidation product. So whether it moves on air or premium LCL services, we have built daily departures, out of almost every key origin to all of the key destinations around the world. And so this gives you incredible optionality and the ability to, again, for smaller shipments, let's call this less than 70 CBM, right, sort of shipments, allow you to get critical products moving. You're not going to send your non-critical products, via premium services, because the cost benefit won't be there. But all of you have critical SKUs that could really benefit from this sort of an option. So, again, this is a very high level view. We would recommend that all of you who are interested, and I think 95% of you are interested, talk to your individual client solutions teams to develop solutions that are very specific to your, to your situation. Next slide, please. So now let's move into a couple of examples of some creative solutions that we've been using for some of our customers, and we'll give one example on the Far East westbound, and then another example on the Trans-Pacific eastbound. And so, Paul, why don't you start?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Yeah, this is the sea air option is nothing new, and we know we don't want to present it here as a new solution. It is, though, very relevant in today's world, as it brings together for specific customers. It brings together the benefits and the best of both worlds. So what we're talking about here is a routing that is partly sea and partly air. In this case, it's an ocean routing from Southeast Asia into the Middle East, and from there by air to Northern Europe. And it allows us to have reasonable transit times, around 15 days, but it's cheaper than air, but it's much faster than LCL. So for this specific customer, that's a customer of us from the UK, they were in need of hitting a product launch, as we mentioned before, but they couldn't afford an air option. And this option they're using currently, and is really very successful. And they're actually moving more of their ocean freight to this sea air option. So this is just one example where it's perhaps not rocket science, but analyzing the specific needs of this specific customer solves for them the issues they had on long transit through ocean, but it can still they're still able to make good margins, and it doesn't affect their overall profitability because it's still 60% cheaper than moving everything through air.
Yeah, Paul, that's great. And as you mentioned, sea air is nothing new, but it's taking on some added relevance, given the complexities today. And one of the other things this allows you to do is to avoid congested ports in Europe. We've talked about, Rotterdam, Hamburg, all these ports are very congested today. And so the sea air solution allows you to move into ports that are less congested, and get product on an air and then out of an airport much faster than you get your shipments out of a port. So if we move to really quickly, if we move to the example on the Trans-Pacific eastbound, because there's no sea air solution that's incredibly viable on the Trans-Pacific eastbound. We have started to deploy what we call a premium consolidation strategy on the Trans-Pacific eastbound for a number of our customers. And so if you look at the traditional ocean FCL market, and we've talked about how congested it is, a mix of LCL priority and air could really prove to be beneficial for you. And this is targeting shipments. It's clearly not intended for 1,000 CBM sort of shipment sizes. That's really not relevant from premium services. But if you can figure out what part of your supply chain, again, makes the most sense to move through premium services, less than 70 CBM sort of shipment sizes, this can be an incredible option for all of you. You get access to capacity. That's the first thing, on a daily basis. Very short CRD to departure windows, right? So we're talking about 3 days CRD departure for air freight, less than 10 days for LCL. Dramatically different than waiting 15, 30, 45 days for an ocean FCL sailing. So the outcomes here are pretty clear, and I'm stating the obvious, right? But it keeps your supply chains moving. You prioritize the important SKUs, for yourself. Shippers can meet important milestone, product launches, other sales initiatives. Many of you might have penalties with your customers if you don't deliver a product on time. We talk to a lot of customers who have to hit a deadline, or they're massive penalties for not doing so. And so these solutions make a lot of sense. And as Sana mentioned at the beginning, the cost differential with Ocean FCL, really makes these premium consolidations viable. Look, historically, air was about 40 times more expensive than ocean. But with the over 10x increase in ocean rates, and with the doubling of air freight rates, that gap has shrunk now to 8x. And so, you are now in a situation, and that doesn't include all of the other benefits potentially of shipping air with reduced work in process inventory, drayage, demurrage, detention, all of these other issues. We haven't even sort of factored those in here. You can see where the relative difference, look, everything is expensive, so I'm not trying to minimize the cost here. That would be irresponsible. But the relative difference between the two, has shrunk. And so giving this some hard thought, and I know 90% of you are thinking about these solutions, makes a lot of sense, and I think could save the year, from a supply chain perspective, for many of you on this call. So,
hey Neil, there's a question coming in specifically
Sure.
around Trans-Pacific and whether there are sea air solutions available on the Trans-Pacific. I could imagine, if you're shipping from whatever Malaysia, that it might make sense to do some air, some sea. What is your view on sea air on the Trans-Pacific?
Yeah, sea air on the Trans-Pacific, there have been, some products, and Paul mentioned one, which is, from Southeast Asia, you can go to the Middle East, and then you can fly to the U.S. East Coast. Flying to the U.S. West Coast gets a little bit challenging from the Middle East because there's a dramatic lack of capacity in that. So that option is available. However, the capacity on the air side with the airlines that are flying those key trade lanes is very limited, to go on that all the way to the U.S. It's available to Europe, but it's much less available to the U.S., which is what has made sea air challenging from Asia to the U.S. under the current conditions. There also used to be sea air products, from Southeast Asia through Busan, for example, right? And then getting on a plane in Korea to the U.S. Those services really aren't, let's say, valid today just because of the congestion on the port side, as well as very congested air freight capacity out of places like Incheon, Korea.
And maybe in addition, so the hub in Dubai offers massive spoke network, a network in Europe, about 45 destinations in Europe the carriers in the Middle East can offer, whereas that's obviously less. That's more limited flying to the US. So the attractiveness of the sea air is especially very relevant for an Asia to Europe routing.
I see a couple of other questions coming in that I think maybe.
But let's go to the wrap up and then address those questions afterwards. All right, can we go to the takeaways? Next slide, please. All right, so we talked about a lot. There are a couple of things that we want you to remember here. The air freight market recovery will be uneven. That means, as Neil very clearly laid out, the domestic market is doing really well. The international is not. And even if you're zooming into international, the Trans-Pacific is not doing well at all. Where the transatlantic is expected to recover much more quickly. This has a massive impact because still 50% of all air freight moves in bellies. And if those bellies are not deployed, that capacity is not available, which will raise the prices because the demand is there. Second thing, peak season will get worse. Both on the ocean as on the air freight side, the peak season will get worse. The most common question of clients is, when is this over? Well, it ain't over, right? For sure, till Chinese New Year of 2022, there will be the stress on the market like it is right now. We've seen inventory levels are historically low, so a lot needs to happen to get back to some kind of a normal, whether that's a new normal or but at least the stress needs to when the stress is reduced, and that means either consumer spending needs to go down, the traffic jams need to be resolved, and inventory needs to be replenished. So that's a lot of things that need to go into that, and then you need time, right? Because we all know that even if the accident on the highway happens, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the traffic jam is still there at 10, right? Even though it might have been cleaned up at 9:10, right? So it just takes time to clean this up. Third one, analyze your data to prioritize SKUs. I think this is the conversation I have most with clients right now. It is either about, landed cost analytics, what are the SKUs that we can actually sell profitably in the current environment, right? How can we reduce number of SKUs, right? We have 10, SKUs for a specific product. We're reducing to 2 or 3, what we're famous for. The other 7 we're not selling right now. And last but not least, and that was the whole topic of the conversation, air is more the affordable thing than you think. I think affordable might be the wrong word, but it's the relative affordability versus ocean is better than you think, simply because ocean freight has gone up 10x and air freight has gone up 2x. All right, let's go to the Q&A. There are a lot of questions here, and let me start with a couple of air freight questions here. And the first one I would say for Neil, are the airports in the US ready for the air freight increase? And there are some examples here of a client who says, I've seen it's a mess and a pain to move freight through. So what is your take on that, Neil?
Yeah, and it's a great and it's a very fair question, and it sounds like you have been a victim to this airport congestion, and so I think that the simple answer is they're not ready. They're not ready for this surge in air freight, and right now a lot of the key gateways are buried with air freight, and we're only going to see more and more sort of capacity thrown in. Over the coming months as airlines, work to add flights as much as possible. There's not one airport that's really immune to this. Now, what we've done at Flexport and what we try and do, at all of the gateways is that we try and bypass the airport terminals. The airport terminals were not built to handle this level of throughput. That's where the congestion lies. It's getting air freight through the terminals and out the front end and onto trucks. The solution here is to bypass those terminals, take freight right off the airplane, and move it into your own cargo freight station or CFS station in order to do the breakdown. And in order to be able to do this successfully, you have to have a bonded facility that can handle, large pallets and heavyweight pallets. And so, that's how we're trying to circumvent. You can't circumvent it completely because if you send loose cargo and smaller shipments, they have to go through the air freight terminals because they're often co-loaded with other shipments on an airline pallet. But we're doing everything we can to bypass that. And in addition, as we look to add more incremental capacity to our own network, we're looking at alternate airports. We're looking at airports that aren't congested, but do have the right facilities in order to handle large wide-body aircraft. And so there'll be more to report on that, over the coming weeks. But, you have to get creative in these situations, and you just have to find ways to deal with the congestion that is impacting this industry quite severely. And this just goes to show how underinvested the airports are on the cargo side, and the need for a dramatic sort of investment plan, across many of these gateways, both in Europe and the US, in order to meet this new demand.
Another question here is and I think that one is also for you, but Paul, please chime in. Is why don't carriers not deploy more wide body freighters?
Well, I'll go first, and then Paul can
Yeah.
chime in. So essentially, everything that's airworthy is flying. Every airplane that we thought had been retired for good has been pulled out of storage, has been dusted off, had heavy maintenance done, engines rebuilt, and is flying. And a lot of this capacity, has a very, very short shelf life. These airplanes can't keep flying for long. So there just isn't anything on the sidelines. And when it comes to new freighters, Boeing is the only company that's building freighters today. They're only building the 777. The 747, actually, the last few freighters come off the production line middle of next year. They're all spoken for, primarily by UPS for their express business. We are in a massive supply deficit, and there's no sort of, big catalyst on the horizon, for wide body, at least over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, exactly, Neil. And so if you look at the statistics, the minus 12% comprises of an increase of 25% of freighter capacity. So as Neil said, everything is flying that is out there. From my experience with airlines, airlines are even trying to put more combis or even passenger aircraft in the air to fly the freight. But that's where also the economics come into play. And unfortunately, just belly capacity, even with these prices, can't justify often to fly long haul. So the minus 12% is really the best we can do at the moment in terms of air capacity.
Great. Well, another question here is, the Delta variant coming up. Are there any, Neil, you're talking to the CEOs of a lot of airlines very frequently. Do they see, what's their view on how this is going to change, let's say, or disrupt the air travel going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Obviously, very fluid sort of situation. I think there are a couple of things. I think if you look at the comments from the CEOs of Delta and United, two of the largest carriers in the world, and they have often talked about how COVID has structurally changed their business forever. There's a very sort of powerful words from a CEO of a big airline that it's changed their business forever. And this means that, we're going to be dealing with changed passenger demand flows, for the next 10, 15 years, if not longer. When you look at the Delta variant specifically, what we are starting to see is that countries that had started or were in the momentum of opening back up and starting limited sort of flying and allowing different countries or citizens to enter their country are now scaling those plans back, right? And so this is happening around the world, and we expect this situation to get a little bit worse before it eventually, gets better as vaccination rates go up. But again, this is the point that we made earlier, is that we see a lot more tolerance for COVID probably in Europe and the US. And so the transatlantic is opening up and those planes aren't scaling back. But in Asia, the plans to start flying have been put in place and constantly scaled back for the past several months. And now everything I'm hearing for the major airlines is that don't expect any new capacity in Asia and it'll start to trickle in, but that will happen towards the end of next year.
One more air freight question before we have also a lot of questions around LCL. The air freight question, and this is one you'll love, Neil. Does Flexport provide chartered air freight from key parts of China to regional airports throughout the States? Well, maybe this is a good moment to also talk a little bit about our charter network.
Yeah, no, and great question, and I love talking about this. So Flexport, early when COVID hit, we made the decision to enter into dedicated air capacity, and we actually have two 747s that are dedicated to Flexport freighters that fly 6-7 times a week between Asia and the US, primarily our freighter base in LA. But we're very proud to announce that we're going to be starting service and extending our network to Miami in the middle of September. So yes is the answer. We do that. We're very proud of it. It's been an exceptional service. It's operated by Atlas, which is the largest freighter operator in the world. And Sana, as you know, and Paul, you're very involved at, we're looking to continually add capacity to our dedicated flight network. And so we're working very hard to bring more capacity to bear, for our customers. But please, if you're not aware of our network, please ask your client solutions team, because we'd be happy to share all of the marketing information on it with you.
Yeah, and I think in short, right, we are serving Southeast Asia, Southern China, Northern China, or Eastern and Northern China, and Taiwan. Through our gateways in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Shanghai. Basically everywhere in the U.S. because it either goes to LA or it goes to the Chicago area, and then it's always connected by immediate trucks to secondary locations. Great, and as Neil mentioned, Miami is added very soon. All right, let's go to some LCL questions here. Question here, critical question. We've tested LCL solutions, but we still have been hit by carrier delays. What specifically should be ensuring the short cargo ready to departure windows for LCL? Shall I take a stab on this first one?
Yeah.
I think what is different between FCL and LCL is that LCL is a scheduled network. And because it's a scheduled network, we have secured the space for a very long period of time. That doesn't mean that I can speed up the vessels. It doesn't mean that the vessels won't have delays, but we do know that there is a guaranteed slot on that vessel for that LCL container because we booked it for a very long time out and secured it. So there, that's where the difference comes in. We have space available on those containers, and we can fit in our customers' cargo, but you're still subject to the vessel delays and the blank sailings, unfortunately. What makes a big difference is that the booking is guaranteed in a way. Instead of that, you have to wait for a booking confirmation, which currently in the current market can take a very long time. And you saw that on the slide that I presented, that from cargo ready date till departure, that time has exploded. And that is different for LCL. What is another difference for LCL is that these containers are sailing premium, which means that they're not subject to roll. And what is also different is that most often these containers are top loaded, which means that they're going on the vessel last and off the vessel first, which saves a little bit of time there in the ports as well. So what we see currently is that the sailing times are a little faster than FCL, but this is also subject to if there's a blank sailing, the vessel doesn't sail. If the vessel gets in a vessel queue in LA, that's a thing that we unfortunately can't control there. Where you start seeing some issues is in the CFS stations in terms of, let's say, congestion there as well. That's mostly under our own control, and we're working really hard to make sure to minimize the impact there, because there's a big surge in LCL right now for the obvious reasons.
Maybe Sanne, if I can add, because there was also a question about so LCL, but then also the sea air option. So in addition to what Sanne explained, that how LCL is different than LCL in terms of priority, it's also that once we then hand over that freight at the airport, at destination, it will be treated at customs as a normal air shipment, and that is also almost guaranteeing a much faster handling. So the combination of that LCL with air will allow for that much shorter transit time.
I'm going to end up with the most loaded question of all in the Q&A, and that is: can the current U.S. administration stop the blank sailings, which are reducing capacity and increasing shipping rates? Well, I think there's a couple of views on this, right? A view number one is this is market dynamic, right? The carriers don't control the traffic jam. The traffic jam is caused by us all by buying too many goods, and that has caused the traffic jam. Those blank sailings are not blanked because the carrier wants to reduce capacity. Those blank sailings are blanked because they have to reinstall their schedules, right? Very often the vessel is just not in time back to make the sailing, so therefore they skip a week. And that's simply because it might be waiting for a week outside LA, and therefore you lose a week. So that's one view on the situation. The other view, though, is like, okay, this is bad for the economy, right? These shipping rates are, putting a tax on the global economy, and this will be bad for society. Well, that's the reason why the administration has teamed up the FMC and the Department of Justice to see whether there is any, anything they can do to help society out there, right? And I think the question there is this market forces, or is there more than market forces? Is there manipulation of market forces? That's the thing that they are going to, resolve that question. I don't expect any quick answers here. And what I can see right now for myself, it is market forces, not manipulation, right? It is, it goes to the highest bidder right now. But it is positive that the government puts a close eye on this, because it is a tax on the economy, and specifically for the medium-sized companies. And we can't afford that as a society. So it's the right move. I'm not sure if there's anything coming out, because we all have to also just together solve this by buying a little bit less and resolving the traffic jams. Well, thank you so much for attending today. As said, you can review this webinar with the same link directly after this webinar. On the 25th of August, our next webinar is about logistics rewired. You will get all invitations for that. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Paul, for the great insights. And all of you, have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.